My dear brothers and sisters, it was in 1264 Pope Urban IV instituted the feast of the most holy body and blood of Christ. A question may come to your mind, why did the Pope institute this special feast of the most holy body and blood of Christ? Because the Mass, the Eucharist, was celebrated every day, as we do it now. And every day, the faithful will take in the body and blood of Christ. So why have this special feast? Were there any doubts in his mind, or something happened on the prior before that made the Holy Father institute this feast? In 1263, a year before the feast was instituted, a police priest had doubts in his minds regarding the feast, so regarding the body and blood of Christ. How can this host, this wine, does it really become Christ's body and Christ's blood? And therefore, he had doubts about his own vocation and call to priesthood. So he made a journey to Rome. And about 70 miles away from home, he made a halt at Bolsena and began to consider what was happening in his mind. The following day, when he celebrated the Eucharist, at the time of the consecration, he took the host in his hand and raised it up for the people to worship. And something happened there. The bread in his hand became the body, the flesh, and drops of blood began to fall on the corporal, the white cloth which is kept. At that moment, something happened within himself, and he believed that the host, the bread, transformed itself totally into Christ's flesh, and so too the wine. That day, all his doubts regarding the Eucharist, the host, the bread becoming Christ's flesh and blood disappeared. Today's readings we heard so devoutly speak about the feast. The first and the third reading speak about, in a way, what's going to happen in the course of time. The first reading we heard about the high priest and king then, Melchizedek, who took bread and wine offered to the Father, to Yahweh, in thanksgiving to what God has done to him and to the people at large. This is what actually we do here in the Eucharist. We offer bread and wine. This is what Christ did at the Last Supper. The third reading, we heard the Gospel passage about the miracle of the bread and fish. If you see the other Gospels, Matthew and Luke and John, all of them relate this incidents. Maybe it was foreshadowing of what Christ will do at the Last Supper. And Gospel, the second reading we heard about Paul's letter. He says, I personally have been inspired, told by Christ to write what actually happened on when Christ had the last meal with the disciples. The word is, you see, this is my body, this is my blood, do this in remembrance of me. This is what Christ actually said when he had the last meal. Today, this feast of the Corpus Christi, what is the message given to us? What do we get? And how can we go out of this Basilica and say, I will live what I have within me? The message is simple now, which we heard time and again, of God's unconditional love for every one of us. God's love is inclusive. No one is excluded from his love. If you see Christ's life on his earth, the 3 years of his life, he did not exclude anyone. All were in his so-called sheepfold. He went out of his way to all, be they priests, be the Sadducees or the Pharisees or the simple folk, the sinners, tax collectors, the lepers, and all those who came to him with faith. He went out of them and made them available. Christ broke his body and shed his blood, which was done at the Last Supper sacramentally, and at the cross physically. Christ broke himself so that we become fully alive, fully human, fully loving, fully Christian. And therefore, on this day, we can ask ourselves, do we believe that we are the body of Christ? If that is so, how do I live this body of Christ? How do I live myself? People in the world hunger as Christ, and they hungered for love, hungered for affection, hungered for acceptance, hungered for empathy. The world today is the same. People hunger for bread. People hunger for love. People hunger for understanding, for empathy, and so on. There is a physical need, there is a spiritual need, there is a social need, there is an economic need, and so on. How in my own life do I satisfy that hunger? To give you two instances or two anecdotes, or one is better, I think. Incident told about the Christmas time, people are all shopping, preparing for themselves for this. There was a little boy, shabbily dressed, standing and looking at the store. And a woman walked in, or was about to walk in, and they noticed him. And seeing his condition, she took him into the shopping store, told the man that please get ready for him 2 sets of clothes and good shoes and something for him to eat. So the woman took him into the washroom, made sure that he's fully cleaned up. Then he came back and gave him the clothes to wear and the food to eat. And then this boy asked this woman, "Are you God?" The woman replied, "I am not God. I am God's messenger, God's friend." So today in the world, in our own home at home, we may live in a nucleus family and still somebody in the house is hungering for something. How do I attend to him or her? In a neighborhood, in a society, and move around, people hunger. How can I satisfy that hunger? When I leave this Basilica after Mass, I'm going out not as Mr. X or Y or Z. I'm going out as a body of Christ. I'm going out as Christ in the world. I'm going out as God in the world. How will I today, or how can I satisfy people's hunger as Christ did in the Gospel passage? He gave them plenty to eat, and there's plenty more was left. Let's pause for a while and ask ourselves, in my own family, with my own friends, in my society where I live, in my place where I work, how do I stand as God to the people? How do I manifest themselves that I am Christ? Christ means I am Christian, and Christian means I am another Christ.